In the beginning, before kings ruled lands and prophets spoke in fire, there walked a man through the dust of Canaan whose name echoed with mystery, Melchizedek. He appeared briefly, almost like a whisper, in the ancient scrolls. No lineage, no past, no death recorded. And yet, his presence was so powerful, so profound, that even the patriarch Abraham bowed before him. Who was this man? A priest, they said. But not just any priest. He was the priest of the Most High God. The first, the original. A man without a recorded father or mother, without beginning of days or end of life. A figure so enigmatic that millennia later, his name would still be spoken with awe and curiosity. Picture this, a quiet dawn over the valley of Shave. Abraham, fresh from battle, weary but triumphant, returns with the spoils of war and the rescue of his nephew, Lot. His heart is heavy, not with defeat, but with the weight of victory. Then, from the hills, steps a man robed in plain linen, holding bread and wine. His eyes speak of ancient wisdom. His voice, calm and steady, carries a blessing. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. Abraham kneels. Melchizedek offers no demands, no throne, no claim to land. He simply blesses. He gives. He acknowledges. And in response, Abraham gives him a tenth of all he owns, a tithe, unprompted and free. Why? What power or authority did Melchizedek hold that the father of nations would honor him so? This story, found in just a few verses of Genesis 14, has ignited centuries of debate, wonder, and spiritual searching. Rabbis, monks, scholars, and mystics have pored over the name Melchizedek. Some say he was an angel. Others, a pre-incarnate Christ. Still others believe he was a Canaanite priest-king who worshipped the true God long before the law of Moses was given. But the scrolls say little. Intentionally so, perhaps. The mystery is part of the message. He comes from nowhere, blesses a man chosen by God, and then vanishes without trace. No genealogy, no grave, no farewell. Just presence, and then silence. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, his name surfaces again. This time, not merely as a priest, but as a heavenly figure of judgment and redemption. A being associated with divine justice, sent to proclaim liberty to the captives and to atone for the righteous. Who, then, was Melchizedek? A man? An angel? A shadow of something? Or someone greater? In the stories that follow, we will walk through ancient texts, uncover forgotten scrolls, and trace the legacy of this mysterious priest-king. We will explore how his blessing over Abraham ripples through history, theology, and the very heart of belief. This is not just the tale of a man. It is the beginning of a revelation, a voice in the wilderness, a whisper of eternity. Whoever Melchizedek was, his identity challenges the way we understand time, lineage, and spiritual authority. In the world of the ancient Hebrews, ancestry was everything. Every priest, every king, every prophet had a lineage, clear, written, remembered. The legitimacy of one's role before God and society depended on it. The Levites were priests because they descended from Aaron. Kings rose from the line of David. Prophets were often introduced by their father's name. But Melchizedek stood outside this pattern. No genealogy, no tribal affiliation, no recorded parents or children. He was not part of the Levitical priesthood because he came before it. He was not a king of Israel because he reigned before Israel existed. He belonged to a different order, one without boundaries, without borders, without time. And yet, he is called King of Salem, which many scholars link to the ancient city that would later become Jerusalem. Salem meaning peace. Melchizedek, the King of Peace. He is also called King of Righteousness, for that is what his name means. Righteousness and peace, two pillars of divine character. In him, we glimpse a kind of eternal priesthood, a role not inherited, but ordained, not passed down, but pre-existent. A priest of the Most High God before there was a temple, before there was a tabernacle, before there was even a covenant. What does that mean for us? Perhaps Melchizedek was never meant to be fully understood. Perhaps his mystery is the very point. A signpost pointing beyond bloodlines and rituals toward a divine order that transcends time. When Abraham gave him a tithe, 10% of his spoils, he acknowledged something profound. He recognized in Melchizedek a spiritual authority greater than his own. Think of that. The father of the Jewish people bowing to a priest whose name and background no one knew. There's a weight in that silence, a reverence in the unknown, a recognition that God's work in the world is not always bound by what we can trace or prove or explain. We live in a time obsessed with origins, DNA tests, family trees, historical facts. But Melchizedek reminds us that some of the most powerful forces in history come without warning, without roots, without records. They just arrive, they bless, and they disappear, but their blessing remains. And so, Melchizedek becomes more than a man. He becomes a symbol, a doorway, a mystery that invites us to consider. What if God has always been moving beyond the boundaries we set? What if righteousness and peace are not confined to one nation, one name, or one era? Melchizedek challenges us to think bigger, to look beyond our maps, and to listen for the footsteps of those who, like him, come quietly from the hills, bearing bread, wine, and words of blessing. The valley was quiet that evening. The dust of battle had settled. Abraham, weary from conflict, led his men and the rescued souls of Sodom back through the low hills near Shave. His heart was a mix of triumph and turmoil. He had won, yes, but war never leaves the soul untouched. And then, from the shadows of the hills, came a figure. He did not ride a chariot or descend with fanfare. There were no trumpets or processions. Just a man, plain-robed, calm-eyed, carrying bread and wine in his hands. Melchizedek. He met Abraham not with weapons, but with gifts. Not with demands, but with a blessing. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, he said. And blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. The words were few, but they rang with timeless power. They acknowledged Abraham's victory not as his own doing, but as an act of divine provision. They gave glory where glory was due. And Abraham, a mighty man of faith and action, responded not with pride, but with humility. He bowed, and from his wealth, he gave a tenth, a tithe, to this mysterious priest. Why did he do that? Abraham was a man chosen by God himself. He had received promises directly from the Almighty. He had walked away from his homeland by faith, trusting a voice he could not see. And yet, here he was, honoring a man of no known origin with a portion of his spoils. This moment was more than politeness. It was recognition. Spiritual recognizes spiritual. Greatness honors greatness. And Abraham, the father of many nations, saw in Melchizedek a sacredness that surpassed explanation. The bread and wine he brought, simple gifts, echoed down through history. They remind us of later stories, of later covenants, of another man who broke bread and shared wine as symbols of grace. But on this day, it was Melchizedek who offered first. He, the priest of the Most High God, made no sacrifice of animals. He made a sacrifice of presence, of peace, of words. And in doing so, he left an imprint not only on Abraham, but on every generation that would come after. That short encounter, barely a few verses in Genesis, became a cornerstone of theological reflection for thousands of years. Because in that moment, heaven touched earth. A weary warrior received bread and blessing. And a priest with no past reminded the world that sometimes the most divine moments come quietly, without introduction, and disappear without farewell. Long before the quiet encounter in the Valley of Shave, Abraham had faced turmoil and fire. The world he moved through was not a peaceful one. Kingdoms rose and fell. City-states waged wars for power, land, and pride. And in the midst of it, Abraham, then still Abram, lived as a sojourner, a man called by God to walk a path without maps. It was in this season of uncertainty that war erupted. For powerful kings from the east had marched westward, sweeping through the region like a storm. Their armies conquered every settlement in their path until they reached the rebellious cities of the Jordan Plain, Sodom, Gomorrah, and others. These cities were no match. Defeated and plundered, their people were taken captive, including Lot, Abraham's nephew. When Abraham heard what had happened, something ancient stirred within him. He was not a warrior by trade, but he was a man of covenant. And covenant calls us to act when family is in need. He gathered 318 trained men born in his household, a small force by any military standard. and pursued the invaders under the cover of night. With wisdom and courage, he launched a surprise attack near Dan, defeating the mighty kings and rescuing the captives. It was a stunning victory. Against all odds, Abraham prevailed, not just in battle, but in purpose. He had chosen to stand for righteousness, to defend the vulnerable, and to act with faith when others would have hidden in fear. But as he returned from the battlefields, the adrenaline fading and the cries of war behind him, Abraham likely wrestled with deeper questions. What now? Had he just entangled himself in the politics of kings? Had he made enemies for life? Would more bloodshed follow? Was this the path he was meant to walk? And perhaps more quietly, he wondered about the moral cost of victory. The burden of taking life, even in the name of justice, leaves a mark. That was the man who walked toward the valley. Not just a conqueror, but a man seeking peace, seeking meaning, seeking reassurance that he had walked rightly. And waiting there, as if by divine appointment, was Melchizedek. Before the blessing, before the bread and wine, there was this moment, a weary heart in search of peace. And a God who sent it, not through thunder or vision, but through a silent priest with open hands. The battles of our lives often precede the blessings that define us. Abraham's journey reminds us that the road of faith is never without cost, but those who walk it in covenant never walk it alone. As Abraham approached the valley of Shave, his feet heavy with dust and thoughts, he could not have known that the most profound moment of his journey was still ahead. Melchizedek stood waiting. No guards, no entourage, just the priest-king of Salem, holding bread and wine. The contrast was striking. Abraham came from the noise of battle. Melchizedek stood in silence. Abraham bore the weight of conflict. Melchizedek bore peace. In that stillness, without ceremony, the two men met. Melchizedek lifted his voice, not to demand, not to declare politics or allegiance, but to bless. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand. There was no negotiation, no tribute demanded, no favor sought, just blessing. And in response, Abraham did what no warrior, no tribal chief, no patriarch had done before. He gave. Freely, he offered a tenth of everything he had. Why? Because he recognized something transcendent, something sacred. This was no mere man. This was a servant of the Most High, speaking not from power, but from presence. Bread and wine. In another age, these would become the emblems of covenant, of grace. But here, in this early dawn of history, they were signs of peace. Signs that someone had come, not to conquer, but to remind. To remind Abraham that God was still near. To remind him that victory was never his alone. To remind him that beyond the sword and the shield, there is a deeper kind of strength. The strength to bless, the strength to believe, the strength to receive. In that simple act, a sacred exchange unfolded. One gave bread and blessing. The other gave honor and offering. And history shifted. What happened in that valley would echo through scriptures, sermons, and souls for generations. Not because of grand speeches or dramatic acts, but because two men of faith met at the crossroads of battle and blessing. One came with dust on his hands. The other came with peace in his. And in the sharing of bread and words, something eternal passed between them. What truly happened in the Valley of Shave wasn't just a meeting of two men. It was a collision of covenants, a preview of something eternal. Melchizedek did not come with rituals, sacrifices, or the ceremonial garments of a Levitical priest. He came with bread and wine, symbols that carried weight far beyond their simplicity. Bread, the staff of life, shared by shepherds and kings alike. Wine, the fruit of the vine, a sign of joy, of covenant, of celebration. Together, they spoke of sustenance and sanctity. They hinted at something deeper, a coming story in which bread and wine would again be offered, this time by another priest-king, not in the shadow of Jerusalem, but at the heart of it. But on that early day, it was Melchizedek who first set the pattern. He blessed Abraham, not merely as a friend or ally, but as one who stood between heaven and earth. His words did more than honor a man. They acknowledged a divine order, a providence that had guided Abraham's steps, a God who was not distant, but involved. And Abraham's tithe? It wasn't payment. It wasn't obligation. It was recognition, worship, surrender. By giving a tenth, Abraham was saying, "You, Melchizedek, are a priest of the Most High, and what I have gained in war, I now lay before God's servant." It was a moment of humility, of spiritual alignment. This is why the story reverberates through the Psalms and the book of Hebrews. In Psalm 110, the writer says of the coming Messiah, "You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek." Not the order of Aaron, not the lineage of Levi, but Melchizedek, the priest with no beginning or end, the one who arrived with no credentials but left with eternal honor. Why does this matter? Because it reminds us that God's ways often transcend our systems. That true authority doesn't always wear a crown or trace its roots to bloodlines. Sometimes it walks quietly into a valley, brings bread and blessing, and leaves behind a ripple that reaches eternity. The blessing of Melchizedek wasn't just for Abraham. It was for us, too. An invitation to trust, a call to honor the unseen, a glimpse of the eternal in the everyday, and a reminder that the most sacred gifts are often wrapped in silence, simplicity, and the sincerity of one who knows God deeply. Centuries passed. The memory of Melchizedek faded from common speech, buried beneath the laws of Moses and the rituals of the Levitical priesthood. But his shadow lingered, quiet, unresolved, waiting. Then came the Psalms. Psalm 110, a royal and prophetic hymn, offered a startling declaration. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek. Who was this priest? It could not be David. It could not be Aaron or any of his sons. This was someone different, someone outside the system, someone eternal. The mystery returned. Generations later, under Roman rule and spiritual fatigue, a man from Nazareth walked dusty roads proclaiming a kingdom not of this world. He healed, he taught, he forgave sins, and he, too, shared bread and wine with his followers, saying, "Do this in remembrance of me." To many, he was a teacher, to some a prophet, but to those who truly saw, he was something more, a high priest not by lineage, but by divine ordination. The writer of Hebrews would later say, "Without father or mother, without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God, he remains a priest forever." He was speaking of Melchizedek, but also of Christ. The connection was not coincidence. It was design. In Jesus, the ancient silence around Melchizedek found voice. In Jesus, the order of Melchizedek was fulfilled, not just as a symbol, but as a living reality. Jesus did not come from the tribe of Levi. He was from Judah, a line of kings, not priests. And yet, he served as both, king and priest, just like Melchizedek. And like that ancient figure, he offered bread and wine, not as mere tradition, but as covenant, as promise, as eternal bridge between God and humanity. The author of Hebrews paints this vividly. He tells us that Jesus, like Melchizedek, holds a priesthood that does not die, a priesthood not built on ancestry, but on an indestructible life. It is a startling parallel, one that ties together the oldest stories of Genesis with the redemptive heartbeat of the New Testament. Through Melchizedek, we saw the first glimpse. Through Jesus, we see the fulfillment. Two priest kings, two bearers of bread and blessing, one eternal purpose. To understand the weight of Melchizedek's legacy, we must grasp what it means to be a priest forever. In the ancient world, a priest was a bridge between humanity and the divine. But every Levitical priest, no matter how holy, eventually died. Their service ended, their role passed on. Not so with Melchizedek. He had no recorded beginning, no documented end. He stood outside the system. And because of that, he became the pattern for something more enduring, something eternal. The writer of Hebrews makes this point plain. Melchizedek is without genealogy, without beginning of days or end of life, resembling the Son of God. He remains a priest forever. This is not to say Melchizedek was divine, but his story, his function, foreshadowed one who was. Jesus. Like Melchizedek, Jesus was appointed, not by lineage, but by divine call. He was not a priest in the temple courts. He did not wear the garments of Levi. He did not offer the blood of bulls or goats. Instead, he offered himself, on a different hill, with different elements, but the same eternal heart. He became the high priest of a new covenant, one not written on tablets of stone, but on hearts, one not mediated by generations of priests, but by one who lives forever. And in this, the order of Melchizedek found its fulfillment. This matters deeply, because if Jesus were merely a prophet or king, his reach would be limited. But as a priest forever, in the order of Melchizedek, he bridges the eternal. He represents us not just historically, but eternally. He intercedes. He blesses. He sanctifies, not once, but always. And because of that, the blessing of Melchizedek continues. Through Christ, we receive a better covenant, a better hope, a better promise. The bread and wine are still offered, not just on altars, but in spirit, not just in memory, but in power. The shadow became substance. The whisper became word. And the priesthood that once visited Abraham in the valley now reigns forever at the right hand of God. Melchizedek's name means King of Righteousness. And through Christ, that righteousness now covers us all. Melchizedek stands apart in a world of patterns. The Bible is rich with structure, tribes, laws, genealogies. Everyone and everything had a place, a history, a role. But Melchizedek? He arrives without context, blesses without condition, and leaves without farewell. He is, in every sense, an exception. That's why his story both unsettles and inspires. For those who need certainty, Melchizedek is a disruption. Where is his father's name? Where are his descendants? Why does he appear only briefly and speak only once? And yet, for those seeking wonder, Melchizedek is a signpost. He reminds us that not everything sacred can be systematized, that divine moments often escape documentation, that God's messengers may come from outside our expectations. This is what makes Melchizedek so important. He's not just a historical figure or symbolic link to Christ. He's a living challenge to our tendency to confine faith to formulas. Melchizedek did not perform rituals in a temple. He did not wear holy garments or recite liturgies. He brought bread. He spoke blessing. And that was enough. There's a rawness in his simplicity, a purity. He points us to the heart of what it means to serve God, not through titles or traditions, but through presence and truth. This is why the writer of Hebrews elevates his priesthood above Aaron's. Because Aaron's line came with limits. Priests died. Sacrifices repeated. The veil remained. But Melchizedek's order was different. Timeless. Singular. Complete. Just as Jesus' priesthood would be. By stepping outside the lines, Melchizedek invites us to do the same, not in rebellion, but in reverence. To consider that maybe God is bigger than our categories. That maybe grace moves through mystery. And that the most lasting ministries are those birthed not from institutions, but from intimacy with the Most High. In the end, Melchizedek may always remain partially hidden. But perhaps that's the point. Not all revelation is about clarity. Some of it is about awe. And in the awe, we find God. Long after Genesis was written, long after the Torah was memorized by generations of faithful scribes, hidden in caves near the Dead Sea, a new voice about Melchizedek emerged. The Dead Sea Scrolls, uncovered in the 20th century, contain fragments of ancient Jewish writings not found in the traditional Bible. Among them was one particularly startling piece, 11q Melchizedek. In it, Melchizedek is not merely a priest or king. He is portrayed as a divine figure, a heavenly judge, a bringer of atonement. According to this ancient text, Melchizedek appears at the end of days to proclaim liberty to the captives, echoing the language of Isaiah. He announces the Jubilee year, not just a time of economic release, but a spiritual reset. He defeats Belial, the leader of darkness, and ushers in God's judgment on the wicked. This Melchizedek is no longer silent or mysterious. He is active, cosmic, redemptive. He is referred to with names usually reserved for God himself, Elohim. He executes divine justice. He leads the heavenly hosts. It's a staggering shift. What do we make of this? Some scholars suggest that the Qumran community, the sect behind the scrolls, saw Melchizedek as a messianic figure, a heavenly agent of God's final intervention. Others argue this was poetic theology, blending symbols to express deep longing for deliverance. Either way, the takeaway is clear. Melchizedek had not been forgotten. His story continued to grow, to inspire, to challenge. He was more than a footnote in Abraham's journey. He had become a beacon of hope in apocalyptic thought, and that hope centered on justice, on freedom, on the restoration of all things. In times of oppression, the idea of a righteous king-priest coming to make things right was not just comforting, it was revolutionary. Through the Dead Sea Scrolls, we see how the mystery of Melchizedek evolved into expectation. Not just who he was, but what he could mean. Not just a man from the past, but a promise for the future. And perhaps, as we read these ancient words, we too can begin to see him, not only as a shadow of Christ, but as a symbol of redemption yet to come. A reminder that righteousness will not remain hidden forever, that peace will one day walk into the valley again. Today, we no longer walk through ancient valleys or receive blessings from robed priests carrying bread and wine. But the question lingers, what does Melchizedek mean for us now? In a world of noise, complexity, and division, Melchizedek stands as a symbol of something purer. Righteousness, peace, presence. Not peace as absence of conflict, but as wholeness. Not righteousness as self-righteousness, but as right relationship with God, with others, with oneself. Melchizedek calls us to remember that holiness isn't always loud. It doesn't always wear titles. It doesn't always follow expected forms. Sometimes it comes quietly, with bread and wine, with kindness, with words that restore. And in that, he challenges us. Are we looking for truth only in tradition? Or are we open to the possibility that God might send messengers from unexpected places? Are we chasing noise or listening for whispers? Melchizedek reminds us that spiritual authority flows from intimacy with the Most High, not from pedigree or politics. He reminds us that one moment of genuine blessing can ripple through history. And he reminds us that the sacred often comes without fanfare, like a quiet figure stepping out of the hills, bearing gifts of grace. In a time when we crave justice and healing, Melchizedek invites us to be bearers of both, to bless without asking, to give without demanding, to speak peace into battle-weary hearts. Perhaps that is his enduring message, that each of us, in some way, can mirror his mystery, not by being flawless or divine, but by living with integrity, simplicity, and quiet strength. We may never wear a crown or be called priest, but we can carry bread. We can offer blessing, and we can remind a weary world that righteousness still walks among us. So we come to the end of the journey. From the pages of Genesis to the scrolls of Qumran, from ancient altars to quiet hearts today, Melchizedek has walked with us, not in volume, but in depth. He entered Scripture like a whisper, and yet his echo carries through centuries. He reminds us that some truths do not need explanation to hold power, that some moments, though brief, mark eternity. That presence, offered in simplicity, can change everything. Abraham met a man with bread and wine, and in that meeting, faith met mystery, war met peace, pride met humility, and something shifted. Perhaps that's the invitation of Melchizedek, to pay attention to the quiet places, to notice the sacred moments that hide in plain sight, to trust that not all that matters comes with a nameplate or a title. Melchizedek's story may always raise questions. Was he a man, an angel, a foreshadowing of Christ? We may never fully know, but maybe knowing is not the point. Maybe the point is to listen, to receive, to bless, and to remember that every valley, every hard, dusty road, might still hold a meeting, a moment when heaven leans close, and someone steps forward, quietly, to remind us, you are not alone, you are seen, and righteousness still reigns, even now, even here, even in you.